Love it.
But only the microphones are in the microphones. So does that microphone work? It does when you're there.
Okay, so we're all good? All right, great. So it is 6:19. I am calling this meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Garza?
Here.
Armstrong?
Present.
Orgish? Here.
All right. Item number 2, approval of minutes. Consider approval of the Kyle Housing Authority November 12th regular meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve?
I motion to approve the minutes.
All right, and
I will second.
thank you. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Excellent. All right. Item number 3, this is the citizen comment period with the Kyle Housing Authority. The Kyle Housing Authority welcomes comments from citizens early in the agenda of regular meetings. Speakers are provided with an opportunity to speak during this time period on any agenda item or any other matter concerning Housing Authority business, and they must observe the 3-minute time limit. Do we have any citizen comments?
I did not get any forms.
Okay, excellent. Then we will go ahead and close that and move on to number 4, staff reports and presentations. First up is our Housing Works Austin.
So thanks everyone for your patience while we resolved our technical difficulties here. As we have had a couple of conversations in the past, we are in the process as the City of Kyle of conducting a housing assessment. Really doing a deep dive into some data and what housing looks like in Kyle, what are our needs, what are our gaps, what does our population look like. We have engaged with Housing Works of Austin, and Aves Azar, who is their executive director, is here to walk through some preliminary data that we have. We shared the same presentation to council a couple of weeks ago, a couple meetings ago. And then really there's some pointed questions that we want to just ask you guys to just kind of have a little bit of a dialogue about what you guys see as some of the needs and some of the opportunities that we have here in Kyle. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Aves.
Thank you, Rosie. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, board members. Y'all will remember I gave y'all a preliminary, some preliminary data information earlier. We'll be able to go over some more detailed quantitative information. And then again, as Rosie mentioned, we'll leave some time because we want to hear more from y'all and help us guide this. Again, my name is Aves Azar. I serve as the Executive Director of Housing Works Austin. Just talking about the agenda, we'll go through again the introduction of the assessment, where we are in the process a little bit, talking about some of those data pieces, and then digging into those key findings and questions. And what I'll try to do my best is, some of this data you've seen before, it's packaged differently, we've cleaned it up, we've refined it a lot more since you last saw it. So I will try not to spend too much time on it, just to be respectful of your time. Just talking about what the housing assessment is as a whole, we're at the point where essentially we had timeline running from June of this year to April of 2026. So we're sort of at that mid-ish point where we've gone through the planning and laying out most of the preliminary half of the information, and then we're going to be going into the qualitative analysis going next. In terms of deliverables, our deliverables to the city will be looking at a report with some recommendations, an executive summary presentation slides, and then some supplementary data that can help guide ongoing conversations. In terms of next steps, I think this is exciting. I would be happy to hear from y'all as well regarding this. Really, again, the quantitative research piece is done. We're looking at moving into the more community engagement and qualitative aspects that will look at interviews and group presentations. We do city council members, city staff, of course, the housing authority, y'all, but then several other organizations, both community, but also all of the different aspects that works with the city. And then we're looking at doing 3 open community meetings, 2 in person and 1 virtual. Again, this is going to be a lot of data, so bear with me for a little bit, and I'll try to make this more digestible and focus on the pieces that I think seem most important. I think just looking at this, we'll dig into the deeper on what the affordable housing looks like and what those projects are, how many units there are. But we're looking at over 1,500 subsidized units in the city of Kyle at the moment. I know I had shared this earlier with you as well, but I do want to highlight it again. Looking at the workers in the top right corner, it's really important to think about the fact that, essentially 1,200 workers live and work in Kyle. Somewhere around 7,200 workers work in Kyle, but they live outside of the city. But then most importantly, essentially over 23,700 residents who live in the city of Kyle work outside the city. So just talking a little bit about, residential, but also looking at jobs and where the access is. In terms of cost of living, again, the average rent right now in the city of Kyle is a little over $1,200. The median family income is, and this is truly for the city of Kyle itself, we're looking at over $100,000, and then a sales price that is nearly $330,000. In terms of just a split between renter and owners, nearly 1/3 of all residents in the city of Kyle are renters, with the rest of the half being formed by homeowners. We did break down cost burden data, so I'll explain this again. Cost burden is essentially households that are spending more than 30% of their income on housing related costs. And then extremely cost burden are those folks who are spending more than 50% of their income on housing related costs. Just in terms of best practices for housing costs, we really don't want folks to be spending more than 30% of their income on housing, because when they are, they're really going to have to cut back on healthcare, childcare, all of those other things that are really critical for a community and for a household itself. Again, for comparison's sake, there's a lot of data here, but I'll focus on the city of Kyle. If you sort of, look at the extreme left side, and you'll see that essentially 25% or 1/4 of all owners who currently have a mortgage are cost burden or are paying more than 30% of their income on housing. For those with mortgage who are paying more than 50%, it's 7%. So it's a much more, sort of modest number from that perspective. Looking at homeowners who do not have a mortgage, they've either paid off their mortgage or have paid in full in cash at some point, we see that within those, really 11% are cost burden. So it's a much smaller number, and 3% are extremely cost burden. And I think it speaks a lot to sort of, folks who are largely likely to be seniors or people who've lived in their homes a long time. They might be on fixed incomes, or their incomes might have declined over time. I think what is worth noting here is you can see really that renters, and this is honestly true for our region, true for our nation as a whole, renters are more likely to be cost burdened. So 55% renters in the city of Kyle are paying more than 30% of their income towards housing. And then an astounding nearly 1/3 of renters are paying more than 50% towards housing costs. Again, while I'm pointing out that data for the city of Kyle, you can sort of see how that maps against other cities in the region, the county, and of course the entire 5-county MSA, with San Marcos perhaps having some of the strongest indicators. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail over this because you have seen some of this before, but as I proceed, I do want to highlight again that part of the HUD requirements, and of course the housing authorities follow this for its own Section 8 program or any other programs that they might have. We look at a regional, essentially MFI level, and these are provided by the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. These are based on what's called the Metropolitan Statistical Area. For our community, that's a 5-county region formed of Williamson, Travis, Bastrop, Caldwell, and Hayes. And of course, Kyle is within that. The 3 major cities in this are Austin, San Marcos, and Georgetown. So again, when you think from that perspective, while we're focusing on our own communities, and Kyle is a good example, we also see that some of those metrics, because they're coming from a HUD requirement and a federal requirement, we're looking at a regional number. So you'll see some of that discrepancy come up as I continue with this conversation. Just from a median family income comparison perspective, again, a lot of data on the chart. I would focus on those gray bands, just if you want to follow along. You'll see that for our region, the 100% median family income by the HUD standards for this year was over $133,000. So that's essentially $34,000 is the median income. For the city of Kyle, that drops to $100,000. And then essentially similarly, you'll see for Hayes County, it's slightly more. Austin, it's more closer to that HUD MSA, but again, lower. I also want to point out two things related to this. One is that this is truly, and this is a HUD requirement, they follow median family income. The household income is actually generally lower than this, and particularly when you break it up by owners and renters, it's also going to be lower for renters. Excuse me. My allergies are not helping me today. For looking at the rent limits comparison, you'll see that similarly for the 2-bedroom, where we perhaps have the best data breakdown, I'll focus on that. For the market rent, we're really looking at $1,600 as the rent for 2 bedrooms. For fair market rents, that's essentially very comparable right now. So the fair market rent is what would be followed for Section 8 voucher standards and what's built in there. Home program, which is one of course, the federal block grant programs that the federal government has. You can see the requirements for MFI based on different percentages, 60%, 80%, 100%. And you'll again see that market rents, at least in the city of Kyle, for 2 bedroom, based on this data, are slightly lower than that. So this is just something worth thinking about as we're looking at affordability specifically for the city of Kyle. It's really important to think about whether those standards align with the local need here. And you can sort of see that those numbers based on the regional guidance from HUD are considerably higher when you compare it to market rate housing, including for the fair market rent. Now, the fair market rent being comparable is not necessarily a very poor thing, but with the home rent allowance, I do want to point out that that would be similar to what would be used for some of those programs. And 60% is generally what is there for the low-income housing tax credit. So if you're building a low-income housing tax credit and you're only going by the 60% requirement, you can actually have rent up to $1,800, which again, would be higher than actually what is in the market right now. If you have a question, please go ahead, ma'am.
Just to confirm, this would be a similar model that's at Opal Point. Is that a correct statement?
We have staff coming up.
Normally I'd be able to just be over there and talk into the microphone, but if I don't, then it doesn't get recorded. So Opal Point does use the same rent limits that theoretically are here for the home program. But remember, Opal Point is not LIHTC. It's not any of the kind of programs that that Avessa is going to be talking about. It's like its own separate deal that was an agreement that was reached between us, the Housing Authority, pre-us, and the actual property to establish and set aside those properties or those units at an income restricted in an income restricted status in exchange for the property tax abatement.
Okay, thank you.
But it does use the federal or the HUD home rent limits as the basis.
Thanks.
Thank you, Rosie. And again, board members, I would not know if, like, to the particular project, but we do have several projects in our region that actually go up to that 80% MFI, and you'll really see that even for 1 bedroom, looking at that 1,800, it's a considerably higher rent allowance than would be, frankly, for large parts of our region. Most of our region would, particularly right now, our rents are lower than that. We should celebrate that as a community, but that also means that when we're talking about income restricted or affordable housing, we really make sure we're serving those most in need. In terms of talking about sort of the 4 major programs that we see in Kyle, again, most of this is under your purview, so you know of this already, but we have public housing, of course, the Section 8 housing, low-income housing tax credit, but we also have at least one project that falls within Section 515 from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which is a rural rental housing program. So USDA has its own program that is available to rural communities. Yes.
I have a question about the housing choice voucher. I was doing some research last night, and can the community get an HCV to go live anywhere, or is it only in the city of Kyle at Section 8 housing?
So this might depend on administrative rules specifically on how it's done. You can take it to other parts. There's the rules on how far you can go, and some of it depends on what your internal guidelines might be regarding something like that.
Okay, so
But at this point, we don't have any housing choice vouchers associated with the Kyle Housing Authority. Okay. So they could potentially, they're saying that they're open to housing choice vouchers. So if someone had maybe a voucher from San Marcos, if that property is within their jurisdiction, maybe that would work. He's going to come and correct all the wrong things that I'm saying.
You can use your voucher within your jurisdiction of your housing authority. Or you can have something called portability, where you can take a voucher to go to another housing authority's jurisdiction. That depends on the policies of the host housing authority. Some housing authorities require you to live within their jurisdiction 1 year before taking it to go to some other part of to protect their own community. Other housing authorities don't have that rule. And you can also create, for example, here where there's no housing choice voucher program for the city of Kyle, you could work with the San Marcos Housing Authority and allow them to use their vouchers in this community. So you can assign an interlocal agreement also between jurisdictions to allow for that as well.
Is there a reason City of the Kyle Housing Authority doesn't do that?
It's just not how our programs are structured. We have two very specific programs.
Got it.
Sorry, we have two very specific programs. One is the Charles Young property is public housing, and so it is a very specific program, and the other is project-based rental assistance. So all different variations of the same kind of cookie.
Okay. Is it something we can do?
It's something that we can talk about in the future. I think as we look at how we want to progress, and this is some of what we'll talk about later tonight as we talk about the capital plan. Our properties are very old and we've got limitations with them, and so we need to think about how we want to over time modernize more than and how much it makes sense to invest in capital at the properties now, considering the limitations that we have with them. So let's kind of put a pin in that one for the capital discussion later this evening, and because I think that it's a good conversation to have. We need to think about kind of strategically long term what we would like to do.
Okay, and that's really where my brain was going at.
Yeah.
Like what's
Yeah.
the most?
Absolutely. No, I know where you're going and I like it,
Okay.
but we just need to talk about it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would repeat that. Yeah, thank you for those questions. I think those are all great ways of thinking about sort of where this, the assessment might lead you all to thinking what next steps might be. Again, you've seen some of this before, but really, looking at what we have right now in the city of Kyle, there's around 1,200 units that are existing. That, of course, includes Charles Young, which is with the public housing, and then, as Rosie mentioned, there's place-based Section 8 as well. There's a bunch, of course, 9% and 4% low-income housing tax credits. The 9% are more competitive. They have more basis points. So essentially, the developer has more of a subsidy to build it. So there's more upfront subsidy associated with it. And then with the 4%, essentially, there's less of a subsidy and less of an affordability requirement. The general good point is that because they're worked on through the state and they're part of a federal program, there's really good monitoring and compliance on those projects in general for the 9% and 4%. And then City Point, Kyle, which is the one that's in the plan phase, there's another 315 units essentially. This is in the ETJ, it's another 4% tax credit property. And then just looking at a map, you can sort of see how they're spread across the community. What's really great is that when you see it, there really is a good dispersion of where the housing is throughout the community. So that's, just generally a very positive thing to bring in. Again, this is something I know that, y'all have seen before, but just really looking at that extremely left side, looking at folks who would be counted by HUD as extremely low income, i.e. those who earn below 30% median family income, and then that very low income band, that's 30 to 60. These are overall households earning below 80,000. And just talking about that collectively, what you can really see is that essentially there's like 40%-ish households that fall within those categories, requiring some kind of assistance. And really in the city of Kyle, this includes everything from medical assistants and paramedics and firefighters. But really, on the other side, looking at that extremely low income band, historically, honestly, for that 30% MFI and below, it used to be largely people on fixed incomes, SSI, persons with disabilities, and seniors. Increasingly, again, throughout our entire region, including Kyle, we're beginning to see childcare workers, caregivers, waiters, and waitresses are beginning to fall within that category. And some of that, of course, has to do with wages not keeping pace with rising cost of living. So just in terms of, just wrapping up this piece, looking at some of the highlights that I want to point out, some of this will be repetitive, but just to sort of leave that with you as we go into the questions. The first is just, while I just want to acknowledge that while, yes, the cost of living is considerably high in Kyle, particularly looking at the incomes of Kyle residents, the median sales price and rent, just compared to the major city next door, which is like Austin, is still considerably low. So just relatively speaking, The average rent in Kyle is $200 less, and the average home sales price is $200,000 less. That's considerable. That should be, something worth thinking about as a community, as a good thing. It's a positive thing. From a jobs housing balance, I think this is where it gets a little more tricky. Again, while 4% of workers live and work in the city of Kyle, 22% of workers in the city of Kyle live outside the city, so you want to make sure there's more opportunities for those folks. And then really 3/4 of residents living in the city of Kyle are working outside the city. So you can think of, just from that perspective of looking at how transportation costs then link up with housing costs, adding to the overall cost burden for a household. For the median family income and rents, again, we were able to go through this, but just, talking about that HUD MFI eligibility issue. And again, I just really want to acknowledge this is not something unique to Kyle. This is something not even just unique to our region. Cities and communities around the nation are struggling with this, trying to figure out, how to work on this with HUD. It's been an ongoing conversation, frankly, for a decade. It's just become much more exacerbated in recent years. But I do want to, think about that as we're thinking about affordable housing for the community here and the residents here. Affordable units, as I mentioned, there's 1,500 affordable units in the Kyle. That's nearly 8% of all housing units in the city. And then we see that over 40% of households earn less than 60% median family income. And then just last, of course, from a housing needs perspective, a lot of essential workers, firefighters, school teachers, we can see are increasingly struggling as housing costs outpace income growth, again, throughout our entire region. I'll pause there and see if folks have if y'all have questions regarding data or information, and if not, then we can jump into some discussion questions as well.
No, you can go first.
My only question is, for the nearly 8%, I understand that affordable housing is based off the MFI, but 8% really isn't reflective of what's affordable, right? Because those prices are inflated.
Yes, and I would also add to that, right, this 8% is really, we're counting units that are legally have some kind of a restriction on their income. There might be other naturally occurring affordable housing or market affordable as well. But then you're right that even within this 8%, there might be units that don't necessarily completely fit the need of the community. So this is just saying 8% of all units in the city of Kyle have some kind of legal restriction for affordability that would, live through some sort of requirement. But beyond that, you're right that it's a little more fuzzier than that.
Should we have an asterisk there?
I think that's a good point. I'm going to make a note of that.
Okay.
And I would also add that even though they're 8% now and it's inflated numbers now, that there's a time element to that income restriction. And, for new, as an example, new LIHTC coming on board has a 30-year affordability requirement. And so while things exist in Kyle the way we have now, and I mean, we've all seen how Kyle has changed over the last 20 years, 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, we could be very different. And that income requirement or that income limit is still there. So while things are softer now with respect to that, there is still value to having those income restricted units over time.
Based on what Mr. Ruloff just mentioned, I want to mention, this is like a condensed form. In the final report, there will be a breakdown by MFI for units. So what are the actual MFIs of the units? You'll be able to see more of that distinction. We have that data, just not in the presentation. And then similarly, you'll have expiration dates for when some of those affordability requirements are expiring, because that's something also to think about for things going in placement now. They're going to be for 30 years, but then also, again, there's going to be, unlike public housing, the low-income housing tax credits have a deadline. So eventually those expire, and older communities, older properties, we're seeing that their expirations are coming up.
So I had two questions. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the donut hole expression. And so when you show the data with the median family being at, was it 100,705?
Yep.
But the local poverty rate is at 7.1. Are we unintentionally creating a donut hole in Kyle where we house the very low income and the very high income, but we leave no inventory for essential workforce like teachers, paramedics, who support local growth business here?
You're right. And I think I would caveat that with slightly saying that it's sort of like a half-baked donut in that there's definitely more housing for higher income. Actually, there could be more housing for lower income households as well. But you're right that we see this throughout the nation because most affordability programs are at that 60% MFI or lower. But particularly, I'll be honest, for ownership, folks are going to have to earn way more in order to be eligible for those, median home price. So what starts happening is there's folks in the middle who are neither eligible for an affordable program, nor are they able to find adequate housing on the market because it's just not serving them. In rental, right now, again, because rents have gone down, I think it's a little more manageable. But for ownership, I would say it's particularly much, much more exacerbated. But also, again, even on the 30% of a fire or lower side, there could be definitely more housing because it's not fully meeting that need.
Right, which brings me to my second question. So the findings that you were showing with the HUD MFI, it suggests that the levels, they don't align with the local income. So if we continue to use the HUD inflated income limits, are we actually pricing out the Kyle residents that we're trying to serve by setting the rent too high for the local market?
So that is definitely an important thing to think about. So even if folks are not being squeezed out, right, if they're eligible and they make it in, they're going to end up paying more than they should be paying. I think that's just going to be a really big challenge. So not only might we be squeezing people out who are just not able to afford even the affordable units, but also we might have folks who are in the affordable units that are paying more than they should, right? So they're having to cut something. Now, the challenge with this is, and this came up in the presentation I made to the City Council as well, those are HUD requirements. There's really no way, again, nationally, there's folks who are advocating for that, working with HUD. At the local level, what I think at least becomes an immediate thing to think about is how to drive some of those MFIs at the lower level, right? So if, let's say, again, looking at this chart, looking at those Kyle and HUD, if we were essentially doing 60% MFI units for the region, which would be what HUD would want us to do, it would actually match to 80% MFI in the city of Kyle. So when you're trying to go to that lower, the 30% might be the way to go. So some of it, again, deals have to pencil. We have to make sure that they, meet all the requirements. But those lower affordability levels will mean that you're more likely to serve people in your own community with a particular need that they have.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course. If we don't have other questions, I do want to just hear from you, and it can be an amalgamation. We have 4 of these in front of you. Really, I think what would be helpful to us as we're doing this work and we're going into the qualitative phase of it and we're going to be interviewing a bunch of people, we would love to hear from you all. Where do you think are the biggest housing needs in your community? What kind of housing mix is needed, right? Like we're talking about the donut from an income perspective, but also, we hear all the time folks want townhomes or folks want smaller homes for seniors to age in, or we want family expanded units. So what is that housing mix, both from an income but typology perspective as well? And then really what programs, policies do you think are needed? And that's, of course, way beyond the scope of what just the housing authority is doing, but just as leaders in the community, what do you see folks really need? And then last, I guess, and I think from hearing a little bit about what role, and maybe that's something just for you all to think of as you leave the dais, but what role can the housing authority play in addressing those housing needs and just sort of being part of that toolbox that fills the overall gap in the community?
And so I'd say we had kind of envisioned this as an opportunity for you guys to give us your perspective on these. If you feel like you would rather think on this and talk about this in a public space at our next meeting, then we're happy to do that. If you want to have a one-on-one interview with Aves and Housing Works and have that conversation that way, we're happy for that too. But this is the kind of information, you're our test case. As we are starting to have let's talk to folks beyond the city council and city staff about housing in Kyle. So this is our opportunity to really hear from you.
All right, I will go first if that's okay. So I am the admin for the Kyle Buda Moms Group. So we have about 9,000 members in it. So all of the posts are approval. So I get to see every single post that comes through, and regularly, and I mean multiple times a day, I see single moms that are asking, how do you do this? Or I see moms that want to leave a bad relationship and they're like, there's no way I can afford this. So they choose to stay with their abusers. So I think the biggest housing need, just based on that information, is something affordable for a single parent with kids, or possibly, because some of them are willing to house with another single mom to support each other. So possibly units that have 2 primary bedrooms, or houses that have some sort of like guest feature. So maybe a mom with a baby or something that can stay in that room. So that would be my biggest thing that I see is it, and like I said, it's regular, multiple times a day. So do with that what you will.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you for sharing that. And you're right that, again, nationwide, but in our region, we're seeing more and more co-living arrangements for single parents because they're struggling. And of course, that's struggling with housing costs, but also struggling with childcare costs. So people are having to rely on, extended notion of family to support them with childcare duties as well. But I think that co-living aspect is important. And then also looking at how single parents can be supported throughout the housing needs.
And on that same note, I'm seeing more multi-generational families, which is very normal in other countries, very taboo here, but I think it's becoming more common as older people are on a fixed income and they can no longer afford to live on their own, that they're now moving in with family members and then helping with childcare or helping with elder care, vice versa.
Are we answering these like 1, 2, 3, 4?
I would say however you want to. If you want to dig into each question or just share comments, I'm open to anything.
Yeah, so for the first one, for the biggest housing needs or challenges in Kyle, I think widening affordability gaps. So that'd be cost burden, essential worker gap, and supply versus demand. The second one, I would say creating a sustainable community. Kyle needs more beyond sparse suburban single-family homes like townhomes. Where are the townhomes here in Kyle? Because I don't see, I mean, I haven't seen, yeah. I'm like, where are they? We don't have that many. So that's one of the things I feel like we need to be looking into. The third thing would be the essential housing programs, insensitizing or oh my gosh, I am not working today. Zoning, thank you, Katie, and comprehensive housing assessments. I feel like we have a lot of work to do, but I know we serve a certain amount of time here, so I hope whatever we bring to these meetings, they kind of roll over to people that are going to serve next, because I feel like we need to build that momentum, and if somebody comes in and takes someone's spot, we need to make sure that they're continuing the work that we're doing right now. So for the fourth one, I think that if we can bridge between policy and execution, one thing would be the expansion of the voucher programs, the developers' partnerships. We need partnerships. That's important, and the property management.
Those are all, I would say, really important points. Some things, I'll just quickly mention, and actually on both comments, we did some Intercept interviews at City Fest, which was honestly a lot of fun. But we got to hear some very similar things from folks there as well. Like, I think there was a lot of conversation of how do we sort of keep the spirit of the community and also the folks who are here, how do we stabilize and make sure that their housing needs are being met while also ensuring that, other folks are coming in. And in City Fest, again, from the Intercept interviews as we were catching people, it was interesting because we definitely heard from a lot of folks who are living here but working in Austin or other places, and mentioned that they had moved from those communities looking for a more affordable space, but then also really wanted to make sure that the community remained intact as well, because that's what brought them here.
Just out of curiosity, Rosie, or if you happen to know this, do we have any sort of restrictions on short-term rentals in the city of Kyle?
Melissa, do we have short-term rental? Just
Honestly, I'd have to look a little bit more into that. Short-term rentals are highly regulated by the state too on that, but we do try to get hotel occupancy tax and different things on it. But I will have to get back to you on
Okay.
on additional information on that.
Cool, thank you.
But as a sidebar, I do want to say Avez is working with us, obviously, on this housing strategy. And I don't know if you saw it at council, but we are looking at updating our Unified Development Code, which is our code rules and regulations for zoning. So Avez and F&I, Friesen Nichols with Chance will be kind of collaborating, making sure that the policy we're setting up, that our code changes and amendments can support some of those policies. So we are working on that on the side as well to kind of make sure that it's linked. It's not just done in a bubble or separate out. So I'm excited about that the city really took this on to help facilitate, some really good planning and long-term look at not only housing, but kind of our codes and ordinances as well.
Cool, thank you.
I just want to, relate to that one thing I want to say. This is just, again, I keep mentioning the regional and the federal sort of guideline because sometimes it can be very demoralizing looking at that within your own community because you want your neighbors to have access to the housing and all of the different things that they need. But really part of the challenge is, I think, increasingly as a nation, we're trying to solve these issues at the local level, right? And we're particularly in the state of Texas where we're really reliant on property taxes. Those have an impact on affordability as well. So it's really becomes a balancing game. Historically, so much of the support was provided either with the federal government and other states. States have programs as well. But I guess all that to say, I think it's important to look at the local level, and I think that's exactly what Kyle is doing. But there's also some real challenges and impediments to trying to solve for all of these issues at the local level as well.
I would say one of the biggest challenges is what you're tackling now is not having a plan or a strategy, where it's kind of like each group is kind of doing their own thing, which obviously is not the most effective way to do anything because you could be working past each other. And then secondly, I know we're talking about like a house structure, but cost of everything is going up. Water, electricity. I think that's almost more of a cost burden than housing, right? Like everything is going up and people are just trying to stay afloat. So I think that should be part of the conversation as well for the city, just because I'm sure we're all watching what's going on here. Water's going up, electricity's going up, or property taxes are going up. Like people who don't think this is going to affect them, eventually it's going to affect them where they can't afford anything because everything is going up. So I think all of those need to be part of the conversation. And then for mixed housing types, I live on the east side, and there's a disparity between investments on the east side and the west side. And I understand you have to keep some areas a little more affordable than others, but I don't think that should be at the risk of putting less quality investments on parts of the city, right? Like where I live, within a mile, they built a liquor store, a Dollar General, and a gas station, which that's fine, but it's not quality, right? So it's like, as the city builds this out, let's be mindful of whether it's intentional or not, being equity through the whole city. I would just like to echo that. And that, I guess I would go for the same policies, right? Just being mindful of equity when we're doing housing. And then for the role of the housing authority, I think the housing vouchers, as I mentioned, I think that'd be a great opportunity for us to offer more accessibility to folks to have more options too, because I think that might be a little more, not less demoralizing, but if you're having a hard time getting housing, having the ability to have an option to go to different places, I think would just be a benefit to anyone involved in this that is struggling to get housing.
Again, I'll just quickly mention, the issue of sort of the utilities came up again in our intercepted interviews. That was something that came up. I'm quite sure it came up during council conversation as well. So yes, and that's actually part of the cost burden indicator is looking at housing and related costs. So it should include insurance, utilities, all of those things. And you're right that becomes much, much more complex as we, think of all of those aspects that go into it. The other thing I was just gonna quickly mention was, yes, I think one big part of it that we do have coming out of these conversations also how to link housing, not just to, of course, employment centers and job centers, which is very critical, but also how to link them to housing that's linked to grocery stores and other things, all of the things that essentially a household needs.
And then other thought I had was the more expensive, people moved to Hayes County because it was less expensive, right? We have 23,000 people who live here that work outside, but we're gonna probably lose people the more expensive it gets here and the more they can justify paying a little more in Austin because that's where they work. So just something to take in consideration.
In the southern part of our region, still is relatively affordable. So you're right, folks are moving here. But I think in the Housing Works, we're looking at the region as a whole, looking at data. And then for the northern part, we're really seeing people are being pushed further and further out, right? Like Pflugerville used to be considered affordable, Round Rock, where now people are talking about Killeen. It keeps on sort of, folks are being pushed further and further out. To your point, we want to make sure that those sort of trends don't, impact the southern part of our county as well. Folks who are here now, again, who were at City Fest, who seemed very excited to be part of this committee. And some people were like, "Oh, we're so glad we did this." There was this one lady who moved here with her family. She was there. She talked about how much she loved it, and she was like, "I really wouldn't want all of this to be lost because this is part of what I came here was for this community, was for my family to be able to thrive here, and I wanted my children to be around folks like this." So.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair. Mr. Rulef, go ahead.
Yeah, so we appreciate your thoughts and your feedback. I would say if you are brushing your teeth tonight and you realize, oh my gosh, I really wanted to say X, Y, or Z, just drop it in an email, send it to me. I will share with Housing Works. And as we progress through, I think this particular board is probably the most important for the work that we're doing on the housing assessment. So we will come back and probably have more discussions, but we appreciate the opportunity tonight. Thank you, Avaz.
Yes. Thank you, board members.
All right, we are moving on to number 2, receive report, hold a discussion, provide staff feedback on the parks assessment.
Yeah, so we, at one of our previous meetings, we had talked about the desire to have a good understanding about what the standards are for parkland, how our properties specifically are positioned in the city with their access to parkland, and what the properties in general look like. I think it's a timely conversation since we're going to be talking a little bit about a capital plan later on this evening. I've asked David Lopez, who is our Director of Parks and Recreation, to share some information, and I'm going to let him talk.
Good evening, Housing Authority members. I'm David Lopez, Director of Parks and Recreation, and there's my presentation. Okay, quick overview of what we're going to be discussing this evening, and it's not showing on this screen, so I'm going to look at this one. But we're going to look at a few initiatives from Park and Recreation, and we're going to bring it home to how it ties into relevant conversation regarding housing and the opportunities that come with it. So we're going to look at the PROS master plan and relevant goals. We're going to talk about 10-minute walk campaign, tell you guys what that means and maybe how that's relevant to the conversation, and then look at the vibe trail overlay in light of a couple of properties. So starting with the PROS master plan goals, one relevant goal would be the acquisition of parkland. There's a deficit in our system right now. The level of service in Kyle currently is 11.5 acres per 1,000 residents. The national standard is 17.5, so you got a delta of about 6 acres per 1,000 residents that we're trying to shore up between now and in 2035. There is also an increasing need for accessibility and connectivity. Some of that can be accomplished by the VIBE plan, but with the current funding strategies, even as we pursue grants, the need is outpacing what's available. So we've got some key projects like Plum Creek East Trail, which is going to be about 1.5 miles of Vibe Spine running through the east side of Kyle, connecting eventually Lake Kyle to Waterleaf Park with 7 connectors to those local neighborhoods. And then we're going to talk about opportunities for enhancing existing parks, which is one of the highest priorities that came out of the PROS master plan, and then looking at how we can bring development to some of our undeveloped parks within the system. I believe we've got 11 total undeveloped parks and 12 developed parks within our system. So starting with the 10-minute walk campaign, Trust for Public Land has an initiative to bring every resident, every citizen within 10-minute walk to every park, which is about half a mile. Currently, Kyle's sitting at 78% of its residents who live within a 10-minute walk to a local developed park. Our goal is to eventually reach 100%. Here's a look at the vibe alignment in light of the two properties, the Pete Dressen and the Charles Young property, sort of centralized to Kyle. The stars are overstated, so it looks like they're a lot closer to some of these parks than they really are. So when you see the lines on the map, this is what is called the master plan right now. It's not truly a trails master plan because it doesn't have the surveys and the right-of-way overlays. Doesn't take into consideration some of the road bond program that'll develop some of these trails. And so we're going to take initiative to tighten these lines up and show regional connectivity and better position Kyle for grant opportunities, and also meeting the needs from residents and what they feel is important for alignments to school, retail, parks, and neighborhoods. So with these two properties we're looking at today, it's Pete Dressen housing and the Charles Young housing. You see a perforated black square, rectangle. You can probably barely see these two light blue dots. Those are the two properties. I guess I'll spend some time. Hopefully, I'm not jumping ahead too much. But this map, it looks like a heat map, is really a priority map for areas of vulnerability. So within the PROS master plan, we looked at 4 vulnerability lenses ranging from socioeconomic vulnerability to environmental to health and also to access/equity. And then we had this amalgamation of these 4 layers, and you get these heat maps. So red means this is maybe a park desert, or we have a lot of need and constraints. And if you start to see the green, those are your park areas. Yellow means it's an area of low priority because you may not have a lot of neighborhoods in that area, or you've got a sufficient amount of parks. And so by inserting a developed park into one of the red areas would lighten that up significantly and meet several needs. So looking at the Pete Dressen site details, it's close to a few parks that are developed, but not quite within our 10-minute walk shed. And so we looked at some opportunities we're going to look at some opportunities for helping to provide access to parks. You can imagine, as I talk about these vulnerability layers, how relevant it is to the conversation at hand and what a park can do to change the community and the quality of life for those residents. And so one thing we looked at was there is sort of like a green belt just behind the properties. And looking at this could be an opportunity in the future, if funding was made available or this was prioritized, to maybe add some park amenities for those residents. There's not really a safe walk to those adjacent parks, and this would be something right in their backyard, so to speak. You could do green belts, you can do some disc golf putting. You can add several amenities within this small amount of acreage that would have a huge impact on health and wellness and quality of life. So looking at the Charles Young site, you see the red square. You've got a couple really of close properties. Just within the 10-minute walk shed, you have Mary Kyle Hardson Park to the northeast, and then to the northwest, you have Greg Clark Park, which is a mile, so it's within the 20-minute walk shed. The key for this site is connectivity. Right now, it's very disconnected. It seems easy to access as the crow flies, but there's a lot of site constraints. And so this is zooming in a little more. What you're seeing there with the red and the green lines are future Vibe Trail alignments, but there would need to be some key acquisitions that take place off map just to the south. You've got, you probably don't remember the Vibe map overlay, but you might have saw an orange cloud, and that would be a future Vibe node. And so with some development that could come by development agreement in the future, which there's no time clock on those, unfortunately, but there would be a very close Vibe node within that 10-minute walk shed, should that development be realized. We've also looked at a trailhead just to the southwest of this property, and so it could help us fast track connectivity. That was I can't remember if it was a pump station that Kyle Water Utilities had owned, and that it's been abandoned, and Parks spoke up and said, hey, you know what, this might be good for a trailhead in the future. And so we'd like to take maintenance and ownership of this property to sort of hold it for what may be to come in future Vibe. Some things that, some opportunities for this too, looking at community development. Block grants, I've worked in agencies where that those grants were qualified to help fund park improvements nearby. There's some undeveloped spaces that are nearby. I believe the Word Place project is close in proximity to the Dressen property. There could be some opportunities that come with development there, but we'd love to get your ideas and feedback on how parks could be stronger collaborators with helping to meet some community-wide needs. And I'll take that feedback at this time, or any other questions you have.
Couple questions. First off, thank you. Do they have sidewalks? So like, if we're saying 0.5 miles, does that mean 0.5 miles with sidewalks, or is that just 0.5 miles distance?
It's as the crow flies, but if you
I wasn't entirely sure how the crow flew.
Yeah, if it was just the crow knows no sidewalks, but when you factor in sidewalks and safe routes, it does expand that walk shed.
Okay. And then second question is, I know the complexity. If we ask the residents, then we could potentially be unintentionally giving them the idea we're going to give them a park, right? Is there any way we can try to do outreach to see what they may like without overpromising anything? Because it feels like I don't think we know what they would like, right? We just went there and thought there's land there and that would be a good opportunity for some sort of park space or for the kids that live there, but I don't know what it is that they would want. And I would hate for us to overbuild something if they're just like, they want a swing set or, you know, whatever the case may be.
They have mentioned, sorry, at when we had the meeting where we were discussed with the residents, like they came in and discussed the transition, switching from the previous property manager to now. They had been told that they were going to be getting a playground, and they were excited about that.
So it's a playground though, but I guess I'm trying to be clear about that of like, what is
like
the
how big of a,
yes,
like what are they expecting?
What are they expecting and what it is they want? Because I think you mentioned disc golf, and I know you're just throwing out ideas, but that might be missing the mark, right? And I just want to make sure if we're trying to bring more inclusivity that we do that. So we don't build a disc golf and they're not going to use it.
Yeah, I mean, the best way would be to have some kind of a soundboarding session just to get general feedback and ideas. With that, there's no commitment. It's just we'd like to hear from you and what's important. Is this even relevant to quality of life conversation for you? We think the answer would be yes, but you never know until you ask.
And the other question that I'm not sure that I have my arms around, and I'm looking at Michael and Talicia, they may know, is the number of children we have at each property, and, you know, school-age children, to see, you know, because that might dictate what kind of open space, if we're talking about playground versus just general community open space that is a little bit more landscaped or whatever.
And would this also include things like little workout machines and stuff that Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center has, like the little
fitness
machines.
elements?
Yeah. Where, like the little walker things and whatever. So would that also be something that we could consider if that's something that they're interested in?
Yeah, those are typical amenities that you might see in any given park, especially community, that contribute to overall health and wellness.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So I have a couple of questions. So when you say aligning the 10-minute walk initiative and the Vibe Trail, I've heard people talking during council. Everyone's excited about this connection. I guess this is more of a maybe Mike or Rosie question, but have we evaluated how this increased connectivity will raise the land value for the properties, for the Kyle Authority housing properties? Like, can we leverage the
No.
amenity value?
No, we have not looked at that.
Okay.
And I don't know that, how that would, Yeah, I don't know that it would substantially affect things. I mean, typically with that, you would be looking at substantially increasing the density. I think something like adding. Yeah, you would be looking at like finished out square footage that would be what would greatly impact the land value there.
Okay, so it wouldn't be where we could negotiate better terms and with private maintenance vendors and,
I don't think so.
okay,
Not for properties the size of the ones that we're talking about.
okay. The second thing was just regarding the proposed side path and park acquisitions. Are these projects being coordinated with the city's general sidewalk and lighting funds? So that it's not us footing the bill for infrastructure for the city? If it's already being planned for improvement?
So I mentioned earlier that we had this very loose, I'm going to use air quotes, Trails Master Plan, but we don't have those alignments and the drainage and all the contours factored in. We also don't have the alignment or integration with mobility plans, and so we are going to be looking into a true Trails Master Plan that would make us grant eligible and also would incorporate the feedback from the mobility. Parks and Recreation has looked into the mobility plan. It is very high level, but it does add meaning and value to the conversation that informs trails and greenways that would be valuable within Kyle Parks.
And to add on, in general, the transportation department's always looking at like safe routes to schools and other grant funding program opportunities that kind of work holistically. There's a sidewalk master plan. It's just sadly sidewalks seem easy, but they need a drainage associated with them a lot of times, and that's sadly kind of what we're missing in some of the downtowns. So it's more of a holistic look when you're doing that. But definitely the city is not only, as David mentioned, with the mobility master plan, looking at that. There is a sidewalk master plan. You're updating your trails plan as well, and then with the Parks and Recreation master plan, really kind of teeing all that up to coincide together.
Yeah, and we're at over, slated or programmed to now have over 100 miles of Vibe Trail. I think the going number is like at least 106 now, where it used to be just a little north of 80. And so that's expensive. I think the going market rate per mile of paved trail at 10 to 12, foot path is close to $2 million now. Where just 5-6 years ago it was $1 million, 1.25. There's a lot that goes into crossings and pavements and grading. It gets really expensive in the acquisition of the needed right-of-ways if you don't already have those. So it's really important to have a trails master plan in light of those costs. If you're going to position yourself for grant opportunities, federal, state, local. We've been talking to county as well and looking at the Great Springs project, which was the original goal of the Trails Master Plan. And in talking to the county and their priorities, we spoke to them about our desire to look at our current alignments and how we could be better regional partners so that we would be a lucrative target for future county funding even.
Right, which brings me to the suggestion of, instead of competing for the same city and state funds, doing a joint grant where you have the Texas Park and Wildlife grants where the parks and the Kyle Housing Authority could apply for that community outdoor outreach program, or they have the CDBG, Community Development
Block Grant.
Yes. And just do some kind of operational cost sharing. So that's just.
Yeah, there's a ton of opportunities. They want to see shovel-ready plans. It's important for them to see something that is actionable and that Kyle has met them halfway on to position them. We applied for a TxDOT grant, a Transportation Alternative Grant, TA grant, and we didn't get awarded that grant. So we looked at those cities who did receive the grant, and I believe all of them were aligned in some form or fashion with the Great Springs project, which was TxDOT is looking at regional value. And so if Kyle wants to be a good candidate for future grant opportunities, we have to show that strategic alignment so that we are seen as a strong return on investment for those grant dollars.
And if I can just address the mention of community development block grants, the city of Kyle is an entitlement community. We do receive entitlement funds for community development block grants. It's only about $270,000, $277 and some change. Melissa has it exactly to the penny. We're going into our second year of receiving those entitlement funds. The first year we used the funds specifically for sidewalks. I think we'll be having some conversations about how we utilize those funds. One of the things that we have talked about considering at least is on more of like a home repair program to help maintain housing stock that is falling into disrepair. So we'll have to go through an amendment to our consolidated plan if we choose to do something beyond what we have told HUD we're going to do in our 5-year plan, which is sidewalks. And that's something that as we get into the con plan process, we would be having a conversation with y'all.
And I think you mentioned something as we were talking about sidewalks, also talking to the school district to make sure that that's, because I know once sidewalks go in, we start to lose bus transportation. So
With safe routes to school.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Lopez. All right, we are going to move on to item number 3, receive a report, hold a discussion, and provide staff feedback on the capital plan for KHA.
So this one will be really Mr. Roth helping us. So we are at a point now where we are wanting to start thinking strategically about how we want to look at our properties and what kind of conversations have been had with our residents on potential capital improvement items. You know, where are we at with things? And so our partners at HACA have been helping to prepare a little bit of the history and to digest what we know. And so we'll go through that and then we'll have some dialogue about it.
Good evening, commissioners. So I'm going to run through the couple of slides here real quick just to share a little bit of the background on this. So the previous management company did work to establish a capital plan for the 2 properties. But I want to stop even before that and just highlight one thing that's really important. Built into both programs is the ability to make capital improvements. However, the amount of funding for that element does not keep pace with the real needs of the properties. Within the public housing program, there is a capital fund program. For the Kyle Housing Authority for Charles Young, that's about $55,000 a year, which nothing is not enough to do the things that are needed for property. And for Charles Young, there's something called a reserve for replacement, which also does not have the sufficient funds to do everything that we're talking about. But I just want you to know that those exist, but they're much smaller than what was proposed and was talked about. So the previous management company did do an evaluation and a look at the existing properties, and they did propose a plan that was about $1.5 million for capital improvements to both properties. And you see the breakdown of proposing about $900,000 for Pete Russin and about $655,000 for Charles Young. Now, that sounds like an awful lot of money, and it is, but I will be perfectly honest, that is consistent with what a lot of what we saw when our staff was here on site walking the properties and conducting the inspections that we did at the very beginning of our engagement with the Kyle Housing Authority. It was also consistent with the current property management that's on site, and it's also consistent with previous messaging that we'd heard from residents that had been communicated to them about some of these types of things that might be coming their way in the future. And that plan includes items which you see here, and there's a whole list of things. There are prices listed there. I don't want to give the impression that those are actually fully procured prices. They're not. They're just talking to a vendor and getting a proposal on what it might cost to do something like that. But it was still helpful to at least have a starting point to understand the ballpark of what you're talking about for each of these types of items. We're talking about pretty significant overhaul of the entire properties when you look at this. You're talking about HVAC replacement, cabinet and countertop replacements in all units, water heater replacements in all units, flooring replacement in all units, window replacement in all units, interior painting in all units, electrical system upgrades in all units, replacing tubs, sinks, toilets, faucets, and other fixtures in all units. And then here, reference to specifically what we were just talking about in a previous item, the playscape. And you'll notice that the playscape for each property is about $42,000. And I will just share with you that we are actually in process of putting in a very small playground with a very small covering, adding some accessibility sidewalk, which is also an expense, and it's costing us about $58,000. So it's saying $42,000. I'm not saying you couldn't do it for that, but what you would get for that would be small. I just want to be clear on that. Replacing parking, camera system for safety and security. You're talking about appliances, light fixtures, and on down the line, you see when you start looking at all of that, that's a pretty substantial rehab of every single unit on each property. And that can feel very overwhelming when you look at a list like that. But I think it's also overwhelming for residents living in a place that has needs that are like that. So I think it's a very honest and fair and important discussion that we engage in and think about. And so what I put forward here is just some discussions here in terms of what are potential options and potential ideas. Not proposing no proposals coming here. This is really just for discussion for us. Option one that's out there is, can we determine if we have the funding and financing beyond the existing capital plan reserved for replacement and the money from the housing authority to meet some of these items or all of these items? Or do we need to prioritize and do only some and schedule it out over multiple years? And I'm not sure how many years it would take to be able to meet all of that within our funding streams and funding sources. Or do we want to look at alternative approaches? And I think all of those are potential things that are worth having a conversation about.
And I will say when the previous company was, previous property management was contemplating this, they didn't have just Opal Point. They had 2 or 3 other properties that were going to be coming on with that significant cash infusion at the upfront point when they entered into the partnership. So we don't have that at this point because we did put a stop to those. And I think before we really commit to, $1.5 million, is that what it came to? Am I remembering that right? $1.5 million of investment in these properties. I think we need to probably just take a quick pause and have a conversation about what our vision is for how we're going to administer the housing authority properties that we have. Right now, we have 2 parcels of land that have 51 units on them. And we have 51 households that we want to make sure that we're taking care of. But we have options about how we do this. And it's everything from, a conversation that is centered around, do we want to continue to be in a public housing program, or do we want to talk to HUD about transitioning away from public housing into something that is more like project-based rental assistance, right? Which is what we have at Pete Dressen. Do we want to take it a step further and move into a housing voucher situation where we have then the ability to maintain the vouchers, but potentially allow our residents to move beyond those specific properties? Do we want to redevelop the properties? Do we want to take what is really old housing stock and turn it into something that could still be affordable, right? But would be denser and maybe more units than just 51 on these 2 specific properties. We have lots of opportunity in front of us that I want to make sure we have a reasonable roadmap
before we make a decision to spend $1.5 million, because we can't do much more than what we're talking about doing because of the age of the properties, right? Anticipating with things that are built in the, what did we decide, 70s? Early 70s means things like asbestos that would limit our ability to really do anything more substantial, right? We can't add on, we can't, I mean, it's kind of we're limited in what we can do with the structures as they exist right now. So we say all of that so that we can have you guys start thinking and maybe tee up a conversation for more of the strategic, where do we want to go from here at our next meeting, if you guys would be open to that. But we certainly want to get your thoughts on what you've heard, what you're thinking about based on the conversation that we've had so far.
Can we go back to
The one with all of the list.
Yeah, perfect.
I
Thank
can't
you.
read that.
No, that's okay. We can read it up here. So
I'm going to lean really close to the screen so I can read it.
perfect. So I know I'm seeing like replace flooring and windows and painting and stuff. I believe some of that happens as we have turnover. Is that right, Talicia, or Mike might know?
Yeah, in a normal situation, whenever there's a vacancy, the first thing you do is just assess the condition. Is it replace or is it just repair? And that can vary from unit to unit. I will say that we do not, and I don't think they have been doing like full rehab of a unit during a make ready. I think they've been doing, probably the biggest thing will be like new appliances might happen at that point in time if a resident's been living there for a number of years, or maybe replacing one or pieces of these items, but certainly I don't know of any unit where all of these items have been replaced.
No. Okay. Thank you. Just out of curiosity, if we were to look at maybe switching to, as you mentioned, like something denser, say, if we were to remove all of the property that is there and build something else, what would that look like for residents if we were to do that? Would we need to then look at alternative housing for those? Okay.
So let me tell you what I've seen in other places. And I'm going to use my friends at the Housing Authority of the City of Austin. They've gone through some pretty radical conversion on some of their oldest properties, where they have found, if they have 3 different buildings or it's a broad campus that's very low density, like kind of the 1970s style, which is what you see for the property that we have, they would take the residents, they would relocate them to a different property within the Housing Authority of the City of Austin system. And they would then have first right of reentry if they want to come back and stay with their community once we rehabbed and built a new property there. We don't quite have that kind of capacity. So we would want to make sure that we're figuring out a way to do this. I think if you were asking me to go do some research on this, I think I would be having conversations with San Marcos. I would be having conversations with Austin. I would be looking at what we have at Opal Point. I would be looking at, honestly, is there a deal we could do like Opal Point that would allow us to move people in at a deeper level of affordability, like a deeper level of income restriction than what we have in the current Opal Point performa, that would allow us to relocate our current residents so that they have stable housing. I mean, that's really the biggest priority for us, is to maintain good stable housing for the residents. There's a lot of different avenues that we can look at, but that would be the first. We don't have capacity within our system to say, move everyone from Pete Dressen over to Charles Young while we do a quick rehab.
Right.
Like, that doesn't happen because we're just too small. But with 51 units, and I can tell you from my 5 months of doing this, the administration and we could be doing things differently and making a much bigger impact for affordable housing and for the city of Kyle if we changed our model, because it's not highest and best use for those properties. And, but we want to be really deeply respectful of the communities there too. So as we're talking about this, that will always continue to be at the forefront, is how we, maintain that.
I know we had talked previously about City Point, Kyle. Is that?
So that's LIHTC that's coming on probably 3-4 years out.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's being constructed ground up, and so it would be 3-4 years out before it would have any people inhabiting.
And what kind of timeline would we be looking at for this if we were to take on the capital improvement plan?
We would need to go through a more robust procurement process than what we've seen before. But I think a project of this nature would be probably 3 or 4 months in planning and then deeply phased for construction, because it's going to impact each house, each resident, each household.
Okay.
Honestly, I think it would take longer than that, to be perfectly honest, just because the planning time, the
Paperwork.
the financing, getting that all set up and arranged and figuring that out, that's not, that takes time. Yeah. That's going to take some time. To do it well, to do it right, to not put the housing authority in any type of financial jeopardy, that takes time.
Okay.
So I guess I'm looking at it from 3 lanes. I know you said there's multiple ways, but I think like one of them would be if we spend the 1.5, and that includes, cabinets for $330,000, windows for $273,000. Are we simply committing to stay landlord business for this 1970 housing in the next 20 years? So does the level of investment significantly extend to patching the units? That's what I see it as we're patching the units, and it's high cost, but it's still going to have that age infrastructure of 1970.
That's right. This is probably, and Michael will correct me if I'm wrong, this is probably as much as you can do to rehab these units without creating a larger issue with asbestos abatement and any potential issues that may come up with trying to do any structural changes to facilities of this age. So we would be doing as much as we could. And so the question kind of becomes, would you rather invest that 1.5 in this, assuming we can, scrape the bowl and come up with that, which I don't think we can in this short of a time period, not to do all of this in one fell swoop, not having the extra deals that existed before that we're going to give the capital infusion. Or would you rather see us working towards a longer term, more viable solution? I think if you do 1.5 million, you're committing to this for a while. It's too significant of an expenditure for a housing authority of our size to then turn around in 2 years and say, we want to do something totally different. That wouldn't be my recommendation for you. If we choose to invest, then we're choosing to invest and to stay in our current structure.
Yeah, and the second thing is peat dressing under rental assistance?
It's project-based rental assistance. It's just a different kind of federal program. It's a different way of providing the subsidy.
And Charles Young is still traditional?
Public housing.
Okay. Yeah. And that would be another thing, is converting the entire portfolio to this voucher.
Whatever we do, I think I'm going to recommend that we convert to the same for both, because it is a lot for only 51 units to have 2 entirely different systems that you have to maintain, and 2 entirely different sets of requirements, 2 entirely different operating environments, 2 different branches of the federal government of HUD, two different field offices. it's a lot. And so I think regardless, I would recommend that we pursue moving out of the public housing space into a program like what we have for Pete Dressen. Because that then allows us to simplify operations to a pretty significant extent. That would make it easier.
So would that transition allow us to use the 1.5 more flexible and subsidize residents in your, I guess, private market developments?
Well, so if we went to the extreme route, and I'm talking off the top of my head and I haven't written all of this out, so don't let me go too crazy. But if we're talking in an extreme route and we opted to repurpose both properties, then any funding that we put into renovations for these is going to be only used by the residents for as long as that they're in that residence, right? So it's 1.5 million, but if in a year, in 2 years, we've worked our path and we're going a different direction and we've got them safely ensconced at a different property in some other way, then we will have spent 1.5 million on stuff that we will tear down, and we'll get no value out of that, if that makes sense. But if we don't, any money that we don't spend on the capital work right now would go towards the eventual it would go towards the new development or density or however you would want to think about it. We would want to bring in an affordable housing developer to help us with that. That's not something that we are prepared to do, but we would find a partner. And we would work on, a new property deal.
Yeah. So I guess the third lane for me would be the redevelopment. So could we turn the 1.5 into seed money for like rental assistance demonstration? I think that's what it's called. Like a conversion.
I don't know that we currently have a full 1.5, but we could turn what we have into seed money for that, yes.
Yeah, our current assets would be what we would be using to help bring us to a different kind of development of those properties, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I just think that we could leverage, I don't know if we can, but if we could leverage the land value to attract private partners.
That is absolutely what we would be doing. It would be along the lines of, we as the Housing Authority of the City of Kyle have this fantastic property and we're looking for a small 2 to 3 story affordable housing development that would come in, and what we're bringing to the table is the property tax exemption and the land, and we would be looking for them to come with construction financing. Or low-income housing tax credits, or some capital stack that we would have to work to put that together. So absolutely, we bring and we leverage the land. That's the asset that we would have in that scenario.
Okay, and I guess in my opinion is that we need a roadmap to explore for tearing down and rebuilding before we exhaust whatever we have reserved on the repairs of a 50-year-old structure.
Yeah, I think that would be, to me, that's the logical, when Michael and I started having conversations about, working through our list of things that we know we need to be talking to y'all about. When we looked at what we could find as far as the history on the capital plan, we really had to kind of take a step back and say, is this what we would recommend as an investment into a 50-year-old property? Or is there is there a different thing that we might want to consider doing? And I think that's a conversation worth having, and I can do some due diligence to prepare for the January meeting to have a more structured conversation than me talking off the top of my head, because there's many different ways that this could go down. And again, I'm just going to say this for the 50,000th time: the residents would be the priority here. We would not be in any shape closing a housing authority, closing a property, and turning people out onto the street. That is not what we would do. I'll say it again. We won't do it.
And I will just add to that, just from the because I can underlying, and I think it's a natural underlying concern that people would have is, what is the reality of the families that are living there? And the reality of the families is we can have these properties be safe, decent, sanitary, using HUD typical language. We can have these properties being maintained, and they are being maintained, and we know that because we see them, and we see the work that's being done in them. And you can maintain old properties for a long time. It's just really expensive to do. And I would also say that we would not hold off on, replacing a water heater for a resident and it didn't have hot water because we hadn't made a decision on what we're doing. We will move forward and do what we need to do from a management and operations perspective. And we will always do, and there's operational money to do that. And we would do that. So again, making sure that priority of the residents will stay first, and we will be maintaining these units. But that also expresses the urgency then for the conversation for us to develop that roadmap and figure out what the right path or the best path is with the resources available to us.
This makes me nervous just because we've seen the city, the senior center is a good example, right? It was gonna be a senior center, now we're calling it a community center. My fear would be we have this well-intended plan to repurpose that. Like, I'm trying to do the math in my head. If we get a loan out for a developer to build a 3-story housing authority, how do we ever pay that back if it's only vouchers, or are we then opening it up and it turns into another not affordable thing because we're going off the MFI?
So don't think of that as being the kind of programs that you have heard Michael and I talking about that are HUD mandated.
Okay.
Think of it as being income restricted affordable housing, capital A affordable housing. There would be legitimate, done right. Not that this isn't done right. This is done in a different style, but this is what could be what City of Austin has done hundreds of millions of dollars of affordable housing bonds for this kind of stuff. We're not doing that because we don't have the ability to do that, nor do I know that there's community desire to do that. But we can attract and we can talk to affordable housing developers to come in and to utilize the land that we have with the partnership that we would have that would help make a deal pencil. So it's not 50 vouchers that we're getting from HUD. It's capital A affordable housing that comes with all of the bells and whistles and controls to make sure that it's done right.
How does a developer, what's in it for them to do something like this?
Well, they make money.
Okay.
I mean, they're not doing it if they're not making money.
Right.
But there's many different flavors of affordable housing developers. Okay. There's some that are 100% absolutely mission driven, and they're in it for the mission, not necessarily for maximum profit. There are some that are in it for maximum profit, and those aren't the ones that we would want to talk to. So there's, if we were to engage in this kind of a discussion, we would want to seek to do it in a way that would be sustainable and be backed with with a quality affordable housing developer.
Is there a way we could get, I'm assuming there's a list that exists of potential developers that we could do our research before January? Or we can just Google ourselves?
I don't know that said list exists necessarily. You can look at, if you're prone to doing a little research, you can look at who Austin Housing Finance Corporation and the City of Austin do business with and who they partner with for their affordable housing bonds. I think that's going to give you a good sense of the kind of developers that they're working with. But these can be anything from big national nonprofits to small community development corporations that are looking, and the City of Austin has partnered with all of them. And I'm not saying that they would come down to Kyle for this kind of work, but this is happening all around us. And so if that is something that the Housing Authority was, wanted to explore, we could have some conversations about exploring that in more concrete details. And if we don't want to do that because it gives folks heart palpitations, that's fine too, right? Because we have good properties that we have maintained that are definitely meeting HUD standards, and we can continue that. I don't know that I can commit that we'll be able to do $1.5 million worth of improvements this year. We will definitely have to back that down and phase it over a period of time. We did just complete the work at Pete Dressen that was all the exterior stuff. So that's been shored up on that side. But I mean, we have a lot of varied paths that we can go down. And I think we should have a conversation about what some of those look like so that you can give us some direction on them.
And my concern is displacement, right? So
Absolutely.
I would feel more comfortable if we had a displacement plan before we even talked past, because I'm assuming there's folks that have been there for a long while, right? And it's easy to say, I'll just go to Opal Point, but that's a significant change, right? Especially if you've been somewhere for a while, you could potentially be breaking up communities. So for me to feel comfortable, I would want to see what a potential displacement plan would look like, and if folks would have a say if they were to go somewhere else to live, they'd have some say versus just, you're going to go here, you're going to go there, you're going to go there, because that's where we have availability.
And I understand. Let me see what I can do on that. I know you guys have a lot of experience on that, but we're more limited in the assets that we have to work within. Do you have any thoughts?
Just to say that everything you talked about is absolutely valid and is absolutely real. These are people's real lives. These are their real homes. These are their real neighbors, their real friends, they have kids that their kids play with. All of those things are real. But I will also say it can be done, and it can be done well. And so I think we can share with you some of the things that we've seen of how it's being done well. I will also say, though, that until you actually get deep into a project, as we're learning and going through one right now with ourselves, everything we're doing this time around is different than we did last time, just because the situation is different. And so the actual plan of what would actually be the reality of what we would do, I don't know that we can be able to tell you that.
Implementation's always the hardest part.
We're not going to be.
Sounds good in my head.
Yeah.
We're not going to be able to tell you that, other than what we can tell you is how some varieties of ways of how it's been done in other places.
Yeah. Okay.
And as I said, if that's a conversation that you guys are open to or would like to explore, then I'm just looking for some direction to us as staff to start down that potential path so that we can see what that would look like for scenarios for displacement, a displacement action plan and potential. I mean, some of that would dictate some actions too, right? I mean, it's just hard to piece it all together. But I mean, we're happy to start, and whether I have that in January or whether that's a February conversation will depend on how much thinking can happen between now and the end of January.
Just out of curiosity, because I know we've talked about converting both properties to the same HUD program. Is that something that would that be helpful to do that first, to focus on getting that, and then being able to move forward?
I mean, probably.
How does that work?
don't
Like,
know.
what timeline, what does that look like?
I think it can be done both ways. It depends which option we choose on the conversion. Sometimes it may be much simpler and easier to do it as part of the conversion, or it may be simpler and easier to do it post-conversion. It all depends on what that decision is. So there's engagement with HUD that has to happen on this to really lay out all those options. There's engagement with financing to determine what type of financing options are actually going to be the ones that make sense and will work. And I think all of those pieces kind of fit together, which is a long way of saying, we're not resolving this at a January meeting.
Yes.
Or a February meeting even. This is the beginning of a process and a discussion. However, what we really wanted more than anything, maybe, perhaps, is just to express the urgency of the discussions.
That would be something I'd be interested in looking at, if it would make more sense to get both of them switched to one program before we start looking at doing any sort of displacement and construction. So that way we're only dealing with one field office and one person instead of two separate ones.
Yep.
So I'll throw that out there.
Anything else?
Jen,
Yes,
based
ma'am.
on your experience, is if giving vouchers so the community can go find their own housing at places that accept it, what's that like in terms of like ease versus getting into a housing unit like Pete Dressen and James Young? Like, is one
Project-based rental assistant versus.
yeah,
Well,
I don't want to say
project-
the word easier, but like, is one easier to navigate than the other, or more accessible?
as far as from an operations perspective or from a resident perspective?
From a resident perspective and operations, like if the housing authority is able to give vouchers, you can come in, sign up, and we can give vouchers. Because I saw that Opal Point accepts vouchers, then the resident can go to Opal Point and get a voucher.
Well, the resident has a voucher.
The resident
And
has a voucher.
it is assigned to them by the housing authority.
Yes.
And they can take it to places that accept vouchers.
Yes.
Opal Point doesn't have any voucher that they're.
I must have misread that.
Yeah.
then.
Yeah, so.
Okay.
That is, I mean, that's an important distinction because a housing authority, not we, because we don't have any, a housing authority gets assigned a certain number of housing choice vouchers. And those can be given to people through the waitlist process that is determined through all of the rules and regulations that we have. I receive a housing choice voucher. I can go and talk to any number of properties, but it is my voucher. It is assigned to me.
So it's not that the apartment complex.
Correct. That's more like what we have at Pete Dressen, which is project-based rental assistance.
Okay.
Right. So this is a facility or a project or an apartment complex that is designated as project-based rental assistance, and it receives the subsidy from HUD. It is dedicated to that facility.
Got it.
So if I have a wait list for that facility, if I decide that I no longer want to live at that facility, I go look for market or naturally occurring affordable housing. I don't take my voucher. It is not portable. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And if we were to switch to that voucher-based, we would then have to do like inspections and all kinds of extra things that come with that. Is that
There's
correct?
inspections involved in all the programs. I mean, and for good reason. HUD
Yeah.
wants to make sure that the funding is going to places that are
Decent, safe, and sanitary.
decent,
Yes.
good places. They don't
But
want.
I'm curious if that would then change the cost. So instead of you going to 2 different places, you're now looking at maybe going to 12 different places because we have residents in 12 different apartment complexes across the city. So I'm curious if that would then, if we're looking at different costs that way.
Different
So,
administration.
okay.
Different,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
It's same but different, and I couldn't tell you what the difference is. I'd have to cost it out and look at really, comparable expense for managing programs like that in places like Austin.
That's the one I've done before in
Yeah.
Dubuque, and it was like we had 3 inspectors, and then we had a designated inspector secretary that handled all of that. So that's 4
It's-
extra.
It's intense. All of the programs are administratively intense.
Yes.
And I will say from our perspective, again, with only 51 units, having 2 different programs is, I would say, excessively administratively complex. And so that is, if nothing else, I will be coming forward with a request or a recommendation that we pick a lane. And that lane would not be the public housing lane is my guess, because I think the federal government is looking to get people out of public housing proper and into one of these other programs. And I don't know that we necessarily would get here's a bunch of housing choice vouchers, go do what you want. That's an entirely different mechanism for how those are released and how those are managed.
The only other thing I would add to that is I think it would, if that becomes a possibility, and I don't know that it is, there's also what is the reality for the resident, and the person holding that, how are landlords in the city going to respond?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, that's another fair question.
That's right. They don't have to. There are some, like LIHTC has to, even for the market aspects of LIHTC or the higher income aspects of LIHTC. If you come to, as an example of how people can structure programs, if the city of Austin were participating in a program and 50% of the units were available at 60% median family income and below, and the rest were market, if that was how the deal was structured, that whole property has to take housing choice vouchers regardless. So those are some of the more robust or the bigger your housing programs, the more sophisticated your housing programs get, then you start to see more the ability to have more controls in place. Those are controls, though, that are put in place by the city council, not the housing authority, because those are all deals that are done through the city of Austin and their Austin Housing Finance Corporation. Good?
Any other questions? No? Okay,
So we'll continue on and maybe talk more in January. Does that sound good?
sounds great. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to move on to item number 4, receive a report, hold a discussion, and provide staff feedback on the key performance indicators report.
Okay. We'll be able to move through this fairly quickly because we talked about a lot of these last month, and there's not a lot of change really because the operation of the property is happening in good order. Our occupancy at Pete Dressen is nearly 97%. There was only one vacant unit during the month. Vacancy loss is just tied to that one unit. Rent collection is high, work orders completion is high, and annual recertification completion is happening across the board. So the key performance, the property is being managed and operated well. And similarly with Charles Young, where we're 100% occupied, we do not have any vacant units. Rent collection is also very strong, and work order completion and recertifications are all happening in good order. So I think it's always important for y'all to hear how the operations are happening, and I feel very confident saying that they're being managed very well right now. Any questions?
I had one. It was just random
Please.
because I saw the word delinquency when I was looking at the material.
Mhm.
Is there a delinquency fee?
So within the project, again, here's the complication of programs. Within the project-based rental assistance program, the maximum amount of late fees you can charge is $30 a month. However, you can't charge it all at once. It's $5 on day 6 of the month and $1 a day after until they pay, maxing at $30 for the month. And in public housing, you set a flat fee for the late fee. So yes, there are fees, but they're different from property to property.
Okay. That's not bad.
No, our late fees are not.
Okay.
No,
Mainly I
they're-
was like, and what is the cost of the late fee was kind of where my head went to. So $30. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions for this one? Okay, we're going to move on to item number 5, receive a report, hold a discussion, and provide staff feedback on the executive director's report. Take it away.
Okay. We've talked through, I feel like, a number of fun things today. Just a couple quick updates on the Franconia claim. When last we talked, our processing of that through the federal government was impacted by the shutdown. It was impacted by the shutdown. I checked in with folks, and they anticipate payment in the first quarter of 2026. So that's moving forward, but not on the timing that we were hoping, which would have been end of 2025. We had a meeting last week on the 9th with HUD. San Antonio Field Office expressed some concerns about the financial reports that were submitted for 2024 and 2025, specifically issues with the balance sheet, not operational expenses. Through that, the agency is going to score a 0 out of 25 for the financial portion of the public housing assessment score. We are working to provide them information in January that's going to really show the true financial position of the Housing Authority, which is much stronger than what was submitted by the previous administration. I'm not sure that I can tell you exactly what was going on with that. I think that because they were a substantial management company that had multiple employees that were doing pieces on multiple properties, that they weren't charging full cost recovery, right, to the Kyle Housing Authority properties. And then probably partly because of how their financial structure was and how they were getting paid and what all of that, how all that occurred. I don't have any visibility into that. What it looked like is that some staff expenses weren't charged, and then they were charged. And so there was showing very big jumps in staff expense. But regardless, they're only looking at balance sheet for Pete Dressen and Charles Young, or in this case, this was just Charles Young because it was the San Antonio HUD, not Fort Worth HUD. And realistically, we look at things holistically, which includes the revenue that we have from the agreement we have on Opal Point. So we're going to work to submit additional information so that they have a better understanding, and we'll have better financial reports, or perhaps more true financial reports going forward. Speaking of management update, MDP is officially no longer assisting us with operations. So we're working through our HUD transition. We have a management agreement that is being prepared between Kyle Housing Authority and HACA that will allow for the official switch over for the Pete Dressen side. So there may be a month or so delay in the draw on that side. Again, it won't affect our ability to get the money. We'll just catch up when we get the management company officially changed over. But we're working through that. And San Antonio is working to update all the systems to reflect current staffing. We'll get forms notarized and filled out, and all will be well on that front. So things are just kind of trucking along on that. Opal Point, just to recap our regulatory agreement with Opal Point, 20% of the units at 60% AMI, 30% of the units at 80% AMI, 50% of the units at market. They're using the rent and income calculator for the region, the Austin Round Rock HUD metro area. They must accept housing choice vouchers if they had any. I mean, yeah. So if we had, or if someone has a traveling voucher like we talked about, I don't know that any such agreement exists for our neighboring jurisdictions, but it's good that they recognize that. So they are still in the process of conducting their initial resident income certification, which is the full document review. They do annual, then we'll do annual resident income certification. So basically a re-review of everybody in an affordable unit every 12 months. They're continuing with their program compliance certificate. It's filed annually on or before April 25th. And again, our term is 10 years. So we should be receiving our annual lease payment of approximately $238,000. I'm sorry, in year 2. In December 2025, I've been working with them to provide mailing information, so that should be in our hands in the not distant future. Stryker Properties is the partner. Sunridge is their property manager. We actually went out on site and had a complete tour with them, with our partners at HACA, right before Thanksgiving, I want to say. Is that right? And it's a beautiful property. Everything seems to be in good shape. We had no concerns walking through. They're very knowledgeable about the affordability requirements. Again, it's a beautiful property. The one thing that is interesting about that is the idea that they have designated units that are income restricted. They thought that would be easier for them because this is the first income restricted property that they've been working with. They have high levels of occupancy, but they are catching up on doing the reviews of those. So I think when they entered into the development agreement or the agreement with Kyle Housing Authority, units were already occupied, and so they're going back and certifying that they meet the income requirements, if that makes sense. I talked to Oxano Development fairly regularly, and we're going to be continuing to apply pressure to the property manager to make sure that those reviews are happening in a timely fashion. Again, nothing to be concerned about yet, but I am monitoring it closely.
Does that mean they're potentially like backfilling? Like if I apply and I apply to rent there and then they look at my income and say, oh, she's under the 60%, or they're doing that all up front?
They should be doing that all up front as they're filling those vacant units, because they chose that unit A, B, C, and D were going to be income restricted, but E, F, and G are not. So they should be doing that as they're filling those units.
Okay. And I'm also curious if the housing rate is cheaper than those rates in some scenarios, potentially, how do they present that to a resident to want to do 60% if it could be cheaper at the fair market?
We have looked at the rents that they're charging, and there's no rents that are outside of what they should be or would be allowed as the maximum rent that they're charging. I don't recall, Michael, if you may recall. I don't know that there were a substantial number of units that were not income restricted, that were much below what the income restricted units were.
Okay.
So I don't know that that's necessarily an issue, but it's a good question that I'll follow up with them on.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else on Opal Point? Okay, pending administrative items. We've got our bylaws today as an action item. We talked about and based on that action, we'll talk about a procurement policy in the coming months. We've got our capital improvement plan that we just talked about. At the last meeting, we processed the acquisition of the admissions and continued occupancy policy. And so we'll be working through that and it has to post and be noticed and all of that fun stuff. And we'll bring it back for adoption and action for you when it's ready, maybe in January, maybe in February, depending on timing. And again, Pete Dressen's policies are in place and current and appropriate for that program. I wanted to do just a quick confirmation on the meetings we have scheduled for 2026, so nobody's caught off guard. We're still looking to be the fourth Wednesday of every month, adjusted in November and December for the winter holidays. Any concerns, needs to change?
The only one I have is September 23rd.
September 23rd, okay.
I have a conflict, yep.
And you're gonna be out, unavailable on that
I'll
date?
be unavailable.
Okay, so that is 9 months in the future. We may have additional members that would allow us to hold that meeting even in your absence, but we will note that in case we're needing to plan differently. Okay. General announcements. The only thing I was noting was training, and I'm seeing a lot of people not making eye contact with me, Katie. So just reminder that the training is important and necessary. If anybody has any issues logging into that, then please let me know.
I actually got a bill.
Okay.
I meant to forward it to you. It said I have an unpaid invoice, and I was like, I might have done something wrong. So I will
Send it to me and we'll look at it. Okay.
Do you need the certificates or?
I don't know that I need it,
Okay.
because I'll have confirmation through NARO that you guys completed it. Okay. Items for future meetings. In January, hoping to bring back further the conversation on the resident council, potentially bringing the ACOP back, having a conversation about the capital plan, maybe having a conversation about the procurement policy, maybe having a conversation about management company discussion. Some of that might that's a lot for one meeting, so we'll see how the items come together over the next couple of weeks. But those are things that we're looking at for January, and if not in January, then in February.
Just a quick question, since we talked about a little bit about other members coming on. Is there a set timeline for someone to come on?
I mean, our new mayor hasn't even been sworn in yet. We haven't even canvassed the vote. There is one vacant position that is a mayoral appointee that is just an at-large position, and then another vacant position that should be a resident. And that can come through the resident council or it cannot. It just has to be a resident. So I haven't had any conversations with Mayor-elect Flores Kale about that. But we do have staggered terms. I think
We're two and she's
odds
one.
and evens. So I think you're up in June of 26, July of 26, and then you guys would be up in June, July of 27. But the new mayor would have the opportunity to reappoint you or to appoint someone in your place once your term is expired.
And then for the resident member, how are we looking on that? Do we need to reach out or?
Well, that's a mayoral
broadcast?
appointee, so it's not anything that we as a board
For
or
the
staff.
resident?
Yes, for the resident.
Oh, really?
Yes, they are all mayoral appointees. Now, that activation could come from someone as part of the resident council. It doesn't necessarily have to be. It's just a requirement for the Housing Authority Board to have a seat for a resident of the Housing Authority.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay. I think we have one last item.
Yep, we're moving on to the consideration and possible approval of a resolution adopting the Housing Authority Board bylaws. All right, do we need to do the review and stuff, or can we just?
We can just talk through it if you guys are good. I mean, you tell me. So the item that we have is to consider approval of the bylaws. We walked through the bylaws at the last meeting. Again, the current bylaws have been in place since 2015. They are outdated. We can look at them if you guys should choose to. They're posted in the backup. I will tell you, the only changes that were made from what we walked through on the screen at the last meeting and what is posted for consideration today is we have changed all the committees to be permissive and not required. Again, with a 51-unit housing authority, some of the committees are envisioned for a bigger operation. So they're there should we choose to go into a committee structure, but it's not a mandatory requirement. And then we had some conversation at the last meeting about the procurement levels. What I have drafted them to be after conversations with the team, with our legal team, and with our property management is to have executive director administrative authority at 10,000. And I picked 10,000 because what was in there before was 3. I don't think I can replace an HVAC for 3, and I don't want to have to wait for a board meeting to replace an HVAC. So I put it at 10 with that as my thinking. And then the trigger for a formal solicitation process, we listed at $100,000 to match state law. So that's where those numbers came from. There were no other changes based on the conversation that we had. Options for you today, you can approve as presented, you can approve with modifications, you can deny them and tell us to start over. We, of course, would recommend that you approve as presented.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve as recommended? Oh, go
I have
ahead.
a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So if we approve these tonight, are we including like a sunset or a mandatory review clause, like maybe every 3 years where this never becomes outdated again?
That's not envisioned in there, and I don't know that that is necessarily, I'm looking at my city attorney to help me if that's something that she would recommend that we put in there. I don't know that that's necessary. I mean, you can certainly make a recommendation to have these be approved or reaffirmed or reconfirmed by the board every so often. I wouldn't recommend trying to amend your bylaws every year because that will create potentially a little instability, but you can pick a time period and recommend that that the board review them. That is your prerogative.
I generally don't recommend reapproval, but I think it's not inappropriate to note that we should look at them every couple of years.
Yeah.
But I also don't think we need to put them in the bylaws. Typically, I would recommend amending bylaws when things need to be amended.
That was it. Okay. Any further questions, discussion? Okay, then I am asking for a motion to approve it as presented.
I make a motion to approve.
Okay, I second that motion.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Great. Thank you very much. That's all the
Yes.
business you have before you.
May I ask one just super random question that came up before we adjourn? I know one of the things that I have noticed at the Pete Dressen property is that there are no clotheslines, like drying lines. I happened to speak to someone who was asking if someone, out of the generosity and the funds that they have, if they would be able to come in and put those in. Is there any sort of paperwork or
So the
like
question is,
permission?
are we comfortable with allowing somebody who is not
It's a nonprofit, if
a,
that helps.
a nonprofit to come in and
Or at least fund them.
install clotheslines?
Or at the very least fund it to be put in.
I mean, or is that something we should just do within our?
I know that's off of the agenda, so I don't know if we're allowed to talk about this or not. Amy?
Yeah, we really shouldn't get into detail
Okay.
on this, but it's something we could put as like a future agenda item.
Hypothetically. All right, then if we could put that on the agenda for next time, that would be great, just to discuss. So, thank you so much. Thanks,
Noted.
Amy. All right, anything else? Great. Then at this time, the meeting is adjourned at 8:20. Thank you so much.